Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depends on your location. Thank you for joining us today at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Our audience is spread, several hundred of you are spread at least through 3 time zones. So it's either good afternoon or good evening or good morning, depends on your location. My name is Khalil Jahshan, and I'm Executive Director of the Arab Center here in Washington, D.C. ACW is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan research organization dedicated to furthering the political, economic, and social understanding of the Arab world in the United States, and to provide insight on U.S. policies and national interests in the Middle East at large. On behalf of our executive board of directors, our academic advisory board, and our colleagues at Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha, Tunisia, Paris, and here in Washington, I would like to welcome all of you to this virtual conference starting today and continuing through tomorrow and Friday of this week. Ladies and gentlemen, as the United States completes its admittedly messy withdrawal from Afghanistan and prepares to scale back its involvement in the Middle East, global powers such as Russia and China are working to increase their influence in the region. Such great power competition is testing American influence and global engagement as a resurgent Russia and a rising China vie for power and influence through diplomatic, military, and economic means. They continue to exploit regional crises and opportunities to advance their objectives and to strengthen their footholds across the Middle East and North Africa. The strategic vacuum left by the rushed withdrawal by the United States is similarly challenged, of course, and manipulated by regional powers seeking to advance their own interests in Afghanistan as Taliban resumes rule in the country, including, of course, neighboring countries like Iran, Pakistan, India, and a little bit more distant neighbors, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and various Central Asian countries such as Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. As President Biden reminded us in his August 16 speech at the White House, and I'm quoting, "Our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely," end of quote. Will China and Russia succeed in taking advantage of this rushed and somewhat disorderly withdrawal from Afghanistan to further undermine U.S. credibility at home and abroad, and more importantly, to depict the United States as a diminished and weakened global power, the way Washington did to the Soviet Union upon its own less than dignified withdrawal from Afghanistan going back to May 15, 1988 through February 15, the following year, 1989. Will Chinese and Russian propaganda succeed in portraying the failure of the 20-year-old US adventure in Afghanistan as a second Vietnam ordeal for Washington, whether this administration or future administrations? Clearly, there are many lessons to be learned from the disastrous end of the American war in Afghanistan, the longest in modern history for the United States. They're not only vital lessons to analyze and fully understand domestically for internal American consumption, but they are equally applicable and of long-term implications for US allies in Europe and in the Arab Middle East, the Arab countries in the Middle East. European allies are wondering whether it is wise for them to follow the lead of Washington in engaging in endless wars or ill-defined international adventures that end up indirectly undermining their own credibility in the eyes of their own constituencies. We've heard all kinds of murmurs coming from NATO allies who are questioning the declared intentions of the Biden administration to differentiate itself from its predecessor, the Trump administration, by being, on the one hand, more involved globally and link American leadership with close alliances and coordination with key partners worldwide. Yet that was not applied in the case of Afghanistan. Many European allies are left wondering what happened to American consultation promised before the speedy pullout officially declared on July 8, 2021. As for the Middle East, Arab regimes accustomed and some quite addicted, frankly, to a close security relationship with the United States are worried about what happened in Afghanistan over the past 5-6 weeks at least, that culminated in the triumphant return of the Taliban movement to Kabul. Countries that have counted for a long time on the premise that the United States of America will come to their rescue if they were in trouble, domestic or foreign, are interpreting the Afghan government collapse to be a direct result of the US withdrawal announcement by both President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. They thus are quickly questioning where they stand on the priority list of US foreign policy under this administration, evaluating the efficacy of their relationship with Washington, and some, more ominously, are even looking to bolster their security with different new alliances or alliance patterns and partners such as Russia and China, as complicated and as difficult such strategic pivot might be. Arab leaders and opinion makers over the past few weeks have been wondering about American commitment to their allies' security despite the long-standing defense understandings, agreements, and relationships, including military guarantees, deployments, numerous bases in the region, headquarters for US troops in the area that they share with the United States. To be sure, Arab regimes who rely on military and security institutions that are heavily dependent on American arms, American training, American logistics, are beginning to question Washington's commitment to their survival and sustenance as they traverse the current difficult domestic challenges and regional strategic terrain. First and foremost, Arab allies are wondering whether Biden may have finally drawn the curtain in his new kind of Biden's philosophy, if you will, for foreign policy, the Biden doctrine called by some, that he might have finally drawn the curtain on American military interventionism in the wider Middle East region or commitments to many of its countries. For US partners and friends in the Arabian Gulf, this should translate into utmost care and caution regarding both the rhetoric about Iran, for example, and the wish to forcefully curtail its activities and intrusion on its neighbors' turf throughout the region. As the United States, in the words of its current president and Secretary of State, will only advise diplomacy from now on as the preferred strategy of dealing with whatever challenges the Islamic Republic of Iran presents, GCC members, for example, must and are beginning to reassess their own defense needs accordingly. Like other governments around the world, Arab regimes are worried about the real meaning of Biden's motto, "America is back," which he introduced, of course, as a replacement for Trump's motto of "America first." The same applies to President Biden's reassessment of the so-called nation building as a US strategic objective, particularly as it applies to the region, in the context of redefining overall US national interests in the region, which have been somewhat stable, generally speaking, or unchanged for decades. Now, considering these and many other questions, Arab Center Washington, D.C. has opted this year in its 6th annual conference to focus on this topic, US policy and global competition in the Middle East. Our excellent array of experts and guest speaker will assess the US role and objectives in the region under the Biden administration during this ongoing dynamic shift in power and alliances in the post-Afghanistan era. Over the next 3 days, our panelists will also probe the impact of these overarching transformations, on issues of human rights and democracy, energy and geopolitical influence, arms sales, economic clout involvement in regional conflicts, including selectively, I admit, cases like Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and policies toward Palestine and Israel and Iran. I would like here to thank you for your participation and hope that you will find the deliberations throughout the remaining time in this conference informative and intellectually stimulating. Let me, before we take a break to begin the first panel, let me remind you that throughout this conference, you are more than welcome to submit your questions to the speakers using the Q&A feature on your Zoom page or by email to events@arabcenterdc.org. Again, events@arabcenterdc.org who are watching beyond Zoom. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag ACW2021, ACW2021. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to visit our website, arabcenterdc.org, arabcenterdc.org, to register for day 2 and day 3 of this conference. Day 2 would be tomorrow on Wednesday, and day 3 would be Friday. Please remain online for just a few moments to prepare technically for panel 1 entitled Empowering Authoritarianism, Impact of Global Competition on Democracy and Human Rights in the Middle East, which will begin in about 10 minutes.